Welcome to the High Performance Herd. We're fortunate today to have Rich Brady, the CEO of Society of Defense Financial Management. We had a quick conversation last week, really enjoyed it. As a rich background and experience, no pun intended there, that just came out. But Rich will share with us kind of the journey in the military, post military, and what he's now doing at the Society of Defense Financial Management. Rich, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, David. Appreciate you having me on.
So I always dive in first, and Rich, you and I talked about this a little before, but for most leaders, there's a time in which they decided, "Hey, I want to lead. I want to build something bigger than me." For you, what was that?
Well, great place to start. And I don't know if there was a specific point in time like that I could say it was on this date at this time, but for me, it was probably sometime in high school, back in the mid 1980s, back in a small town in Kansas, where I realized that there was probably a lot more out there in the world than there was in that small Kansas town, and there was a strong desire to get out into the world and lead and ultimately lead large organizations. So that's probably for me where it started, the genesis story.
Well, Rich, it's funny because when facing my college choices, I tell people all the time what drove my college choice was getting the furthest I could from my mom, and not that I didn't love her and do all that, but I'm like, yeah, it's time to be independent, time to move on. I looked at my choices and said, well, US Naval Academy is the furthest away, and let me go try that thing. So there probably was more to that, Rich, from yeah, hey, here's early leadership experience. I do want to move from Kansas. We'll talk about your military career, but prior to that, was there something that said, yeah, hey, I was leading in this way. I saw that I like that. What else was behind it?
So a lot of it was looking at leaders, being kind of a student of leadership. You look at others who are organizational leaders, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector, and looking at the path at which they got there. And so there was a point in time there in high school where I started reading about CEOs of corporations, and I found one of the common denominators was that many of them served in the military, and you know. Further than that, many of them served in the Marine Corps, and I said, okay, well, that's a path right there. If I'm going to go down this route, I want to look at the military. And I had come from a family. My father had served in the Army. My mother worked for the Department of the Air Force as a civil servant. So I was around the military, around the public sector. It was always something in the back of my mind, and so this kind of reinforced that decision for me that hey, if I'm going to go down this route, if I want to lead an organization, if I want that opportunity to see the world and to help grow a business, or whether again that's in the public sector or the private sector or the military, you got to start by probably going through the military route.
Awesome. So, Rich, you joined the Marine Corps. If you'll give us hey, from that first awesome day to your breadth of experience and kind of here's my short history of military service, which is remarkable. If you'll share some of that and, just talk about the transitions, the responsibility, what you learned along the way in your military career.
So, so I enlisted in the Marine Corps, in the Marine Corps Reserves, in 1988. Depped in, as they would say, in '88. Shipped out to basic training to boot camp in 1989. May 30th of 1989, to be exact. It was about 9 days after my high school graduation, so I wasn't wasting a lot of time to go into the Marine Corps. Spent the summer of '89 in at MCRD San Diego, going through basic training, and then once I graduated, went back to St. Louis and started college. So I went to St. Louis University, pursuing a degree in international business, and kind of an interesting backstory there. I'll get back to the military, but at the time, I was kind of looking at the world and looking where things were headed, globalization. I felt like, hey, anything we do in the future, from a business perspective, it's going to be global in nature, and international business is going to be important. So I should probably get a degree in that. At the time, there were only 2 schools in the Midwest that offered a degree in international business. One was Wichita State University, and the other was St. Louis University, and so, I chose, St. Louis University, over the 2. But went to college, started in 1989. While I was there 4 years, did, officer candidate school through the PLC program, so, by the time I graduated in '93, I was offered a commission, in the Marine Corps and, went on active duty at that time in 1993. Started out in Quantico for about a year, then, did time at Camp Pendleton in California, Monterey, California after that. Then my first tour in the Pentagon in the early 2000s was in the Pentagon on 9/11, and just kind of worked my way up from there. Did time in Okinawa, Japan with 3rd Marine Division, spent some time in Iraq while I was there, and then back to the Pentagon to work on the Joint Staff, then command tour, a battalion level command down at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Then the Marine Corps is great about schooling, so they sent me to the National Defense University where I spent a year. After that, I was fortunate to get to go into the attaché program, became a military attaché, a Marine attaché assigned to the State Department at the U.S. Embassy in Tbilisi, Georgia for a couple years. Then back to the Pentagon for my 3rd tour there. If you're listening, you hear I'm spending a lot of time, too much time in the Pentagon. And at that point in time, I thought this was gonna be it. I was gonna retire out of the Pentagon. But then I was offered a command position out at United States Military Entrance Processing Command, running all the MEP stations. So I spent my last 4 years, 2017 to 2021, command of US MEPCOM out in North Chicago and retired in late 2021.
So, I'm curious, there were a couple things there that struck me. One, Pentagon on 9/11, and if you kind of share with the audience, what was that like? I'm always intrigued, like, well, how did leadership show up that day? I mean, there's a bunch of things that we could dive into, but it's just, most of us remember where we were on that day.
No, thank you very much for asking. Quite frankly, I've not in the last 25 years, and it's hard to believe that this September is the 25th anniversary of 9/11. But haven't really had the chance to talk a lot about it. Obviously, I've thought a lot about it. So that morning, I always tell people, started like any other morning. It was a beautiful morning in the Washington D.C. area. Went into work early, left the house at about 6:15. I think I was in the Pentagon by about 6:30, 6:45, and, started work. Interestingly enough, we had just moved into our new offices, in the D ring, the Friday prior, and so we were brand new into our offices, on that Tuesday morning. There was the monitors, the detailers, the people who do assignments, for Marine officers happened to be in the Navy Annex, that day right up the hill from the Pentagon, and so, at about 8:30, 9 o'clock, most of the people in our office, it was kind of a cubicle farm office of about 15 or 20 people. Most of them went up to the Navy Annex to hear the monitors talk, but I stayed back in the Pentagon, because I wasn't a mover that coming summer. So there were only about 4 or 5 of us in the office, and we were actually watching, what was going on in New York on my computer, when plane hit the Pentagon. And I can remember it just as if it was yesterday, on right next to my cubicle, there was a window that went into one of the inner rings of the Pentagon. And, you could hear and feel the concussion of the blast. And I just kind of leaned over to look out the window. And as I looked up over, you could see the fireball coming right up over the top of the building. And we didn't waste any time. We basically just said, hey, let's get the heck out of here at a little bit stronger term. One of the things that we had done the Friday before, as we were looking at the new spaces, was we happened to find kind of a back door out through a stairwell that got us right out into south parking much quicker than the kind of the normal hallways. And so it's fortunate because instead of coming out of our office and turning right, which would have taken us right basically to where the plane had come in. We turned left, and within 20 feet, we were down a stairwell and out the building within probably a minute, minute and a half. At
Mm,
first, I'll be honest, you didn't know what happened because they had just completed construction in that area of the building, and my initial thought was, well, that maybe somebody planted a bomb in there or something. But as soon as we stepped outside into South Parking, you could smell it smelled like you were on a flight line. You could smell the jet fuel burning, and you knew right away what it was. And from there, everybody would we you know, like I say, 3 I think 3 or 4 of us right there together said, "Okay, 2 of us go up to the Navy Annex, try to get, with the other group of people from our office. Other 2, we're gonna go over to, a house where one of our coworkers lived about a mile, mile and a half away, and we're gonna try to start calling." So this was all before cell phones. Nobody in the office had them, and so we were trying to get, accountability as quick, as we could. And then after that, it was basically, "Hey, don't come back, to the office right away. We gotta figure out what the damage is," and our office was damaged, by smoke and some water, not, directly by fire, but we weren't able to get back into our office until, just after Thanksgiving, so about 8 weeks later. And one last comment about this, kinda how surreal this was. Um, when we got back into our office that morning, somebody had brought in donuts on 9/11, and that box of donuts was still sitting there in the office untouched, and, the clock is still sitting there with the time that the plane hit. It was almost like, everything had been frozen in time for about 8 weeks. But, you
mm,
know, after 9/11, once we got back, I mean, the world had changed, and, we were back working up in the Navy Annex during that period, when we couldn't get in our office. They piled us all into a little office, and we were working on folding tables and, just working mad hours to get, resources and, um, personnel and equipment, everything into the fight.
mm. Um, so, long career in the military. If you step back from that and say, Here's what I saw from leading teams. Here's what's important. Here's the lessons I would share." What's in that portion of your life that you learned about leading?
The fundamentals of leadership really never changed, but the methods in which we lead people have changed. The fundamental tenets of Marine Corps leadership, your leadership traits and principles, all still stand today. Bearing courage, decisiveness, dependability, endurance, enthusiasm, all of those things that are ingrained in you from early on. But the methods have changed. There's a lot more distributed operations today. So, when I was a young lieutenant out at Camp Pendleton in the mid 90s, you could always see and touch your people. Like they were all right there, your Marines, your 60, 80 Marines in your platoon. When I was a company commander, they were all right there on base. Nowadays, obviously we're operating a lot of distributed operations, and so like my last command at US MEPCOM, I had 67 operating locations all across the United States, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico. So you can't just reach out and talk to somebody. And not only that, but once the COVID pandemic happened, and I was in command during COVID, a lot of the workforce where they could went remote, and so all of a sudden we're using teams to manage people, and that creates some opportunities and challenges, and so we all adjusted to it. But at the end of the day, again, those fundamental tenets of leadership never changed. And one of the things that I always enjoyed as a lieutenant and even as a colonel in the Marine Corps, and today as a CEO, is what I would call management by walking around. A lot of people who grew up in the 80s, 90s remember that terminology, and that's just getting out and walking around, walking amongst your people. And so when I was at MEPCOM, I would do that in our headquarters quite often because I was up on the 4th floor behind 3 closed doors and a bunch of administrative assistants and, military officers that were protecting me from everybody else, right? But I would just get up in the middle of the day and just walk around the building. It would drive my staff crazy because 'cause they're like, "Where's the colonel? What's he doing? Who's he talking to?" But that's how you get a feel of the organization. And I struggle with that, to this day from a remote perspective because sometimes I don't feel like I have that feel. It's harder to gauge, in a remote setting than it is in person.
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of organizations, Rich, and I push that all the time. Like, hey, where's your town hall? When do you get everyone together? That can still happen remotely. I have a handful of organizations that are completely remote, and I think your organization is now.
Yes.
But it is a different challenge on the, well, what is a town hall? What does this mean when we all get together? How do we do this? And a handful of those organizations make it in, an intentional effort to go, well, how do we get in a physical room, once a year? How do we see each other? But, depending on the organization, that's tough. You've had the fortune to run organizations. Well, your command experience, and now CEO. What are the similarities and differences if you had to describe them to the audience?
Absolutely. A lot of people ask me that, what's the difference between being a colonel in the Marine Corps, a commander, where I had 4,000 people working for me, or now the CEO of a professional association where we've got a small staff of about 15 people, but 14,000 members. There are similarities and there's some stark differences. One of the kind of biggest differences is that, when I was in the military, I never really worried about pay and benefits, right? The pay is set by Congress, the benefits, it's all set up, the healthcare plan, the retirement plan, thrift savings, all of that, it's set, and I really didn't have a say in it. Everybody got it, and everybody got paid every 2 weeks without really any action on our part, from a leadership perspective. Obviously, in the corporate world, that's not the case. I am the fiduciary for our association's 401k plan. I'm the one that makes the decision on which healthcare plans and how that's lined up and what the copays are going to be. I have to make sure every 2 weeks that there's cash in the bank account to make payroll. So that's a big difference, particularly when you've got that pressure of, okay, it's on me. Do we have the cash? Do we need to move cash from another account every 2 weeks? Are we making, is revenue coming in, or not? On the government side, they don't worry about revenue. They obviously worry about appropriations, but that comes every year from Congress. The amount may vary, but it comes every year from Congress. In the business world, you're not making revenue unless you generate it, right? It doesn't just come to you. So those are some of the big differences. Some of the similarities are really, again, it gets back to those fundamental tenets of leadership, and how you lead people, how you lead organizations. It's about setting a vision for the organization. In the military, that would be called, probably, your commander's philosophy of where you want to take the command while you're in the command position. In the business world, obviously, you need to have a vision as well for the organization. After that, you have to be able to, operationally execute that vision or that strategy and properly communicate it. Again, these are all very similar to what's in the military. Most people think in the military, you just give an order and everybody does what you tell them to do. Trust me, that's not the way it works in any organization. you still have to you still have to communicate it. You still have to explain it. You still have to have the town halls. You have to repeat yourself over and over and over again, and it gets tougher when you're in a remote environment, or like, when we had distributed operations. I would go out and visit our stations all the time and give kind of the same stump speech over and over just to make sure the message got out.
Yeah, I mean, Rich, the need to inspire is a component of leadership. We got to inspire people to believe something and then take action toward the belief, is how I always talk about it. And without that, we don't have high performance. We don't have unity. We don't have clarity. We don't have everyone rowing in the same direction. We'll dive into that a little bit. So you leave MEP Command as a military officer. You transition out of the military. Talk to the audience a little bit about that transition, how you found the job, what the timing was, kind of what that was like. I lived through that, and it's an odd feeling when you've known the military and you're like, all right, well, yeah, I'm stepping out of something that's been very familiar and comfortable in the way that it is, to something different.
No, well, first of all, there's a lot of uncertainty. You think like, well, I'm a Marine colonel. I'll go into this like I do anything. I'll make a plan. I'll execute the plan. But you've never really had to do anything like this. You've always been assigned to a job, right? You may meet with your monitor, your detail assignments officer, and have a discussion about some different options. But at the end of the day, you're gonna have it. They're gonna give you a job. Now it's all on you. You've got to make a decision and put a plan together. So one of the first things I did, this would have been about 5 years ago in 2021. So I was about 6, 8 months away from my official retirement date. obviously, you start cleaning up your resume, you start building your LinkedIn network, updating that, make sure that you start reaching out to people, having coffees, talking to about the transition. But I made the decision early on that I was not going to go back into the public sector. I wasn't going to go back into government. I mean, that was an option. I could go be a GS employee with the government somewhere. I just decided, hey, I've done that for 30 years. It's time for me to do something else. I want to go into the private sector.
And
And
Rich,
then
was there something more to that than, "Hey, I just don't want that"? Was there, "Hey, that feels too the same"? What was behind the, "I don't wanna do that"?
yeah, a lot of it was it feels too much of the same. Like I've been doing that. I mean, if I want to stay in, I could have stayed in. I mean, I had the opportunity to stay in for 2 more years or so in the Marine Corps. I could have done that, but I didn't want that environment. I wanted to, and to a certain extent, David, it's about testing yourself. It's like, okay, can I make it on the outside? Do I have it? Do I have the skills to do this? I certainly felt I did, and was willing to take the chance and test it.
Well, Rich, that was one of my key drivers to leave the military was this time and rank. Like that there is a set amount of time I'm gonna
Right.
be a lieutenant in the Navy, and there's not, can I be promoted quickly? Sure, but it's not gonna
Yes.
happen like it can happen outside the military if I go find that. So, that was one of the key drivers for me was like, yeah, I wanna move away from this time and rank, very structured career path. And, even to say that sounds ridiculous because you and I know, like, no, there's a bunch that happens in our career path that is up to us and monitor detailer, but it's a very structured environment. So I understand the desire to go, well, let me go find something different.
If I'm being, honest here, what they were offering me as well, was to go back to the Pentagon, a 4th tour, and, where my daughter was in school at the time, she was going into her junior in high school. I said, I know what those hours in the Pentagon look like. I'm looking for a little bit more flexibility, a little less of the structure." But, it was again, a lot of it was, I've done my time in public service in the military. I wanna go into the private sector now. And within that, search, I decided that, obviously the DC area was probably the best landing place. Going in the area of financial management, accounting, auditing, budget, where I had worked was probably the best opportunity. And then I started looking at companies themselves, and what I had kind of decided was, one, I'm not going to look at private equity owned companies because there's a little bit different culture there. I wasn't looking for that at the time. And I really wasn't looking at the small to mid-sized firms either, because felt like if I want to go in, let's go into a larger established firm where they've got some structure in place and maybe a little bit more stability. So I was looking at the audit advisory consulting firms, your big fours, and some of the strategy firms as well. And that was all moving along really well. I had 2 offers, in hand, with those when the opportunity at SDFM came up, kinda right in the middle of it, and so I, put my but, I knew some of the people on the search committee. I had been a member of, the Society of Defense Financial Management, and so I thought, well, I'm going to send in my resume, send in my cover letter. Hopefully, I'll get the chance to at least talk to the search committee board, and maybe I can tell them kind of where I think the association should go to support the profession. And as I like to say, one interview led to a second, second to a third, and a third to a job offer. So they must have liked the vision I laid out for them, because I got the job offer. And so now I'm sitting with 2 offers to go the audit advisory consulting route, or 1 offer to go the CEO route.
And in the end, you choose SDFM. And what was behind that decision?
Well, the first was, I reached out to a couple mentors, and I always think that's important, to have a couple people that you can trust their advice. Not that you always take it, but at least you can bounce some ideas off of, because we all have blind spots, and I want to make sure I was talking to people and making sure I was seeing the whole decision and not just pieces and parts of it. But ultimately, it came down to, one of my mentors said, "Hey, look, you've been in leadership positions a lot, particularly the previous 4 years straight. You're pretty good at it. So this is a strength. You may want to lean into it at this point in time. And second, these jobs in the association space as CEO positions don't come open very often. My predecessor was in the position for about 10 years, and that's pretty consistent, 5 to 10 years. So this opportunity to to get in a position like this may not open again for another 5 to 10 years. Whereas, quite frankly, with the audit advisory consulting firms, any day of the week you could go over there and there's going to be a job available. Not that, they're going to be giving you one or something, but there's plenty of jobs available at any point in time. And so a lot of it was timing. And I did have a strong desire to make some changes in the organization. I had laid out a vision for the search committee that I felt would be good for the profession as a whole, and I wanted to execute on that. So in late October 2021, I accepted the position and started on November 8th, 2021.
Um, Thanks for sharing that. I join SDFM. What's the, I'll call it environment culture. You talked about a potential vision forward, but just in a, hey, how did you find the organization when you land there?
How I found the organization, how a lot of associations are and were at that time, and that is, somewhat, not keeping up to date with the current business environment. Many associations for decades or more relied on a steady stream of new members coming in to replace members retiring and moving on. That actually started to change probably 20, 25 years ago, where new members, early careerists, frankly, just weren't joiners. They didn't feel compelled, just because I joined a profession, they didn't feel compelled to join the professional association, which was not the case, when I first came in, in the Marine Corps and started working financial management. The first thing you kind of did was you joined the professional association. Likewise, what was going on base, in the military was, when you came to a base, you automatically joined the officers club. That actually started to change too, where people weren't joining the clubs, and so the associations were seeing the same thing. So it really came down to associations operating more like a business in the sense that we need to prove our value proposition to our members all the time. We're nonprofit, but that doesn't mean we're no profit. Obviously, no business can operate at a loss year after year. We're not a charity. We have margins. We do pricing. We actually do government contracting as well. And so we needed to operate more business like, and we needed to modernize. I haven't mentioned, but the organization was actually the American Society of Military Comptrollers when I took over, and we did a full rebranding about 2 years ago to the Society of Defense Financial Management to recognize not only who was doing the work in this profession, but the type of work that they were doing.
So you've referenced things have changed. I think you guys are now remote. There's a bunch in that story. So if you'll give us, hey, from the day I joined, what's happened in kind of a short story.
But no, I took over. We were basically fully remote at the time. Still, kind of the post COVID pandemic. People working remote. I felt strongly that we needed to bring people back in at least a couple days a week, and so we went to hybrid work environment. That was tough because people were conditioned at the time. They didn't want to come back to work. They wanted to keep working remotely, and we knew we were going to lose some people, but that was okay. I felt it was important from an organizational standpoint, a teaming standpoint, to have people in the office a couple days a week. That was working well until about a year ago. Some changes in government that frankly changed the government business operating environment significantly, resulted in us making the decision to sell our building. We own a building in Old Town Alexandria, which actually we close on officially next week. So we'll have that sold, and we're going fully remote at that point in time. But it's important, one of the things that had changed over that period is we have a better performance management system in place, a better accountability system in place that we didn't have. And you have to have that. I think that's a precursor to being able to work effectively in a remote environment is people have to be accountable, and you've got to have the systems in place that support that and enable that.
So Rich, talk about that. I think that's a challenge for a lot of people today. I just traveled and saw my son and grandkids, and they're living through what you lived through uh, post COVID. They're still kind of remote, come to the office when need to, and I think there's a push to bring people back. But how do you and, and I framed kind of what you said there. I go, as long as you're managing performance remotely, it works. But if you're not, then this becomes, well, I have the freedom to work at home and I'm not working. So how did you manage it at least in that environment?
Tell a couple there I could tell a lot of stories about this, about how it wasn't working and why it wasn't working, some of this, understand, David, is maybe it's therapeutic. I just kinda wanna talk through it, but, as I said, when I was at US MEPCOM in the military, most of our military entrance processing stations, the outlying stations, couldn't work remotely because of the nature of the work. A lot of it was touch labor, doing medical physicals, fingerprinting, testing, stuff like so they were coming in every day, whereas at the headquarters up in North Chicago, the majority of our staff could work remotely. And we saw right away, like initially when everybody went remote, productivity remained the same, but it started quickly dropping off. Worst case scenario, we knew people were coming onto calls, then they'd been drinking, being in the military, you can go out and quickly do a health and wellness inspection on them to see, hey, what's going on out there. So there were those issues going on. In my own, when I got here to SDFM, I remember early on, we were having a Teams call, and there was a lot of noise in the background. I said, "Hey, what's that noise?" It's probably 2:33 in the afternoon. "Hey, what's all that noise?" And somebody's like, "Oh, I'm in my car. I'm driving my dog to the vet." And I'm like, "Well, wait, how are you engaging in this call? How are you taking notes? How are you, participating in this call when you're driving your dog to the vet?" And so there were just so many cases like that where, and then finally one last one, people wouldn't be, working in the middle of the day because they're taking care of family issues, but they say, "Hey, don't worry, I got up this morning at 5 a.m. and worked from 5 to 8, and then I'll get back on tonight from, 9 p.m. to midnight." I said, "Hey, that's great for you, but all of our business partners and our members, they're calling it noon, 1 o'clock. So how are you supporting our customers, our members, when you're working, basically after hours?" None of that was really conducive to a work environment or a business environment. And most people would say, "Hey, look, I'm just as productive working remotely as I am working in the office." And I never tried to argue with that. I mean, you can with some people, but I said, "Okay, I'll give you that. If you say you're just as productive, I'll give you that. But this isn't about individual productivity. This is about team productivity, and it's about organizational productivity. And that's what's most important is we've got to make sure that the team and the organization are operating at an optimal level and not just each individual on their own." But it takes time to. It really comes down to cultural change, and I struggled for probably about a year and a half to make some of the cultural change that we needed to in the organization. And you know, one of the downsides of being in the military, I think, one of the challenges is you always feel like you got this responsibility to develop your people, and you've got the tools, and let's work with them to build them up. But at a certain point in time, I realized at SDFM, like some people are not going to change, and we had to change the people, not try to change them. And so we had to unfortunately let some people go who just were not assimilating to the new culture of the organization and the accountability that we expected working in at the time a hybrid and now in a remote environment.
Yeah, I mean, I always said when I was running companies that you would need to really work hard to change people or change them.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that
Yeah.
was like easy. Like, hey, I need to coach them. I need to get them to come on board. But if they can't, I need to find someone. And Rich, I always talk about is I need to fuel a magnet that attracts the right people to our culture. And the stronger I make that magnet, the more compelling it is, and the more repelling it is. People that are not our fit will go, I don't want to work here. And it's evident when they step into whatever environment that we have, virtual or in person. So you started that transition. Sounds like, hey, we had some, I'll call it challenge to get that new culture humming. And what was behind the eventual, hey, it's working, we got it, I got the right to there may have been people you need to let go. What was behind the, yeah, eventually we got it to change because.
Uh, so, uh, 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 so it's a great question, and I don't know that you can ever really put your finger on and say hey, I'll know that this change took place when these things happen. You're always looking for kind of leading indicators, number one. And number two, you're always going to be working on it. You're never going to achieve like, hey, we've got it, we achieved it, and we're always going to be here. You're always going to have to work at it. And probably the best example I like to give is back in the 90s, 90, 97, 98, I was a company commander. We had a problem with the NCOs, our Marine NCOs, taking accountability for the barracks. Like, okay, who's running the barracks here? You know, the NCOs need to be running, making sure that we're maintaining good order and discipline. And so we really worked to empower the NCOs, give them training, make sure they understood, their, as we call, their left, right, lateral limits, their limits of their authority, what they could and couldn't do, and just train them properly, train them. But again, the same question came up, like, how are we gonna know we're there? And so, one Friday morning, I came into the office and my first sergeant came and he said, "Hey, sir, we had an incident last night in the barracks." I'm like, "All right, well, it's not uncommon, but go ahead, tell me what happened last night." So anybody who's been in the Marine Corps knows Thursday night in the barracks is field day night. You always do field day on Thursday night, and Friday morning, the company commander comes in, battalion commander. We do field day inspection, and we go through the rooms. And so the first sergeant said, "Hey, we had one of our NCOs last night who got into a fight with one of the staff NCOs, one of the staff non-commissioned officers from another unit, who happens to be they were occupying some of the rooms in our barracks." I was like, "Well, what was the problem?" I said, "Well, these staff NCOs from this other unit weren't cleaning their rooms, so our NCO basically called them out on it and said they needed to, you know, get their shit together, quite frankly, and they got into a fight." And I said, "Okay, we need to bring that corporal or sergeant in, and we'll give them a verbal counseling and tell them." But in the back of my mind, I'm kind of smiling. I'm like, "Okay, we're there. We're where we need to be." These NCOs have taken accountability for it, even to the point where they're willing to take on a staff NCO to make their point. And so,
Yeah.
similarly, let me jump forward 30 years to where we're at today. And I don't know that I could put my finger on exactly like, hey, if I see this is going to happen. It's looking at some indicators of people taking the initiative, making decisions on their own, just keeping me informed, CCing me on an email, or asking, "Hey, do you need to be on this call? I can take it. I'm good taking it." But that's where you got, okay, people are taking, they're accountable for what's going on. They're taking the initiative. So it's all of these little leading indicators that let you know that, okay, we're heading in the right direction. You're, again, but I want to make a point. You're never there. You always have to keep working on it because it can slip away from you in a heartbeat. So you constantly have to be working on it.
Yeah, I mean, Rich, for the longest time, I've said leadership is about vision, values, expectation, and engagement. And that I always started to reference, well, when those are present more often than not, that, hey, I see our vision in action. People are speaking of it, they're talking about it. If we're trying to become the most trusted XYZ in the Midwest, and people are talking about it and doing it and go, well, that's not going to help us be trusted, that then we're starting to see that move. And your barracks thing was that, where it's like, well, no, we understand the expectation, we understand what the standard is, and we're trying to move there. And as you've alluded, there's plenty of this in sports. I always look at, I go, we can run the play, and we can go, but we can still run it better. um, and so there's always the opportunity to improve. um, in that environment shift, sounds like you're in another transition where you're selling the building, you'll move back to remote. Um, how are you feeling about that?
I actually feel really good about it. Again, I feel like the performance management system is in place. The accountability system is in place. We are in transition from a business model perspective, but that's starting to take hold, and the team understands what we're trying to do, kind of the vision going forward. And one of the advantages of being in the military, and certainly the Marine Corps, is the ability to kind of simplify things. Particularly in the Marine Corps, we have to simplify stuff down to the easiest level, I think. And so what I've always tried to do is say, okay, like as we move forward into an operation or we're moving into a period of time, keep these kind of three or four things in mind. Let these be your kind of guidepost. And if I could just give a couple examples here. So when I was at commander of MEPCOM, I had, kind of four things that I always said when I talked to all the commanders, whether they were our majors, lieutenant colonel, battalion level commanders, our sector commanders. I said, our number one priority is to always protect the applicant, that young man or woman, whether they're 17-year-old or 22-year-old coming through our MEP station. We need to make sure they're protected from the moment they step in our doors until we release them back to their parents or their recruiter. They belong to us. Second, we need to focus on the customer. The customer, frankly, was the recruiting partner. We had to help the service recruiters make their missions by applying the established DoD standards to accessions and medical standards, the testing standards, and the moral standards. Third, maintain standards. Both personal and professional standards. I always say the standard you walk by is the standard you accept. And then finally, when in command, command. When you are in a command position, you need to lead. Don't be a bystander. You got to be out there. You got to be on the floor. You got to be leading your team. So I boiled it down to those four things. That was in the military, and that worked very well. When I got into this position, a lot of what we do are events, and so I similarly try to focus people on, okay, at the highest level, what should we be focused on? What are people coming here for? Number one, they want their training, education, and certification. So we've got to get them that opportunity to get their training, the best training they can get, with best professional development and the certification. Second, they want a chance to network with their peers. They want to be part of a group, be part of a community, and so we need to create that environment where where they have the opportunity to find mentors and coaches, and have a strong group that can support them. And then finally, everybody wants to walk away having a good experience. They're going to remember how they felt about an event. And so anytime we have an engagement with one of our members, we want to make sure it's a positive one, where we're optimistic, we're positive, we're there supporting them. And so just kind of you boil it down to some simple three things, like say, because you can never guess all the problems that people are going to run into on a day-to-day basis or at an event. You cannot predict and go through all those and prepare for them. But if you say whatever you run into, if you keep these three things in mind and let these be your guideposts, I'll support whatever decision you made, as long as it's not illegal, immoral, or unethical.
Yeah, I mean, in many organizations, those become these robust core values. This is how we want people to act and behave. And while all else fails, act and behave the way we've demonstrated to act and behave. Um, so I'm curious, in the transition of the organization from the day you took over, and you talk about team, and you can do this back in your military career as well. Talk about team transition to something that's more high performing. So you assume a role, responsibility with people under your care that you're leading, and over time, they're more effective. They're performing at a higher level. They're more cohesive. Tell me, talk to me about that transition for you with teams, and it can be at SDFM. Where has that occurred, and how have you made it occur in the organizations that you've led?
No, absolutely. So the first, and I'll kind of bounce back and forth between both the military and SDFM. But first is you got to get the right people on the team, right? And interestingly enough, in the military, you really don't get to pick your team. You get people assigned to your unit, and so you kind of skip that first part. You can fire people. I've relieved commanders below me, and first sergeants and sergeant majors have done all that. But for the most part, you get people assigned to you, so you take the team that you got. In the private sector, obviously, you've got more choice on who you want to be on your team. A lot of people think in the private sector, well, you can easily hire and fire. Well, it's not quite that simple, but you do have a little bit more flexibility than you do in the military or the government. One of the areas that I struggled with when I first got to SDFM was getting the right people on the team. I knew probably 45, 60 days in that there were a couple folks on our team that probably weren't going to make it. They weren't understanding the vision, the transition we needed to make, kind of stuck in the old ways of, well, again, this is how associations work. We let, people just, the new careers, they kind of come in and they replace the retirees going out. And I said, well, look at the numbers. That hasn't been the case for the last 15, 20 years. So we can't, we can't keep going back to that, because in time, we're going to be shutting down in another 10 to 15 years. But so they just weren't getting it. But at the end of the day, I didn't trust my gut. I didn't remove them at the time. I said to myself, well, wait a minute, in the military, I would look to remove them now, but I'm in the private sector. This is the association space. Maybe I need to be looking at this a little different. I know what my gut's telling me, but I'm not gonna trust my gut. I'm gonna try to work with them, get to the next step, which is development, and I'll talk about that. At that point in time, though, since I didn't make that decision, and because there's kind of a cyclicality of what we do on an annual basis, I wasn't in a position where I could do the removals for about another 18 months. And by that point in time, I mean, you've lost a lot of time in the organization. So I would say without question, you got to get the right people on the bus, the people who are bought into the vision, bought into change, and have the skills and abilities to affect the change that you want to make. The second is you got to lean into training, and we did that. We hired an outside consultant to do some training with our team, and really kind of focused on building their not only individual capabilities, capacities, but building team capacity. And then finally, you got to give them the tools. You know, you can't say, "Hey, I want you to work remote," but you're not going to have the full Microsoft Office 365 suite. You're not going to have Adobe Pro to digitally signed documents. You got to give them the tools that they need to work effectively in a remote environment. So I'd say kind of those three things. One, make sure you got the right people on the team, and make that hard decision early on as a leader. Two, commit to training them, both individually, in their own professions. I got some people who are certification people who've got their own kind of niche that they need training in. Other people on the education side that have their niche. So you work on that individual training, and then team training as well. And then finally, give them the tools they need. And I guess the final thing would be then empower them. Don't micromanage, empower them.
So that leads me to one of my next questions that I almost always ask. What's been the hardest part of leading teams to get them to act without you driving each of them personally? So there's kind of the, hey, how do I get them motivated to move beyond me? How do I get them to perform without me driving every result personally, that they're pulling their weight, they're adding more value? What's been the hardest part for you of that?
Well, one of the hardest parts for me was, first of all, organizationally, the culture of the organization when I came in was every decision came up to the CEO. Literally every decision, didn't matter how big or small it was. And so that kind of took me a bit by surprise. I said, I can't manage like this. We're going to grow the organization. I'm going to be focused on growth, kind of outward focus. I can't be down and in every day. And so one was putting structure in place, talked to the board, hired a chief operating officer who could be kind of that day-to-day focus down and in. I'm still, managing the senior leadership team, meeting with them regularly, but the people below the senior leadership team, two or three levels below the organization, were no longer coming to me. Although they did. I mean, and that frustrated when their boss wouldn't give them the answer they wanted, or they didn't feel like it was responsible, they would still try to come to me. So I had to be very intentional about pushing stuff back down. And that was disruptive to the organization. Like, well, wait, this isn't the way it works. I said, well, this is the way it's going to work in the future. Again, that's part of that organizational or cultural change that not everybody was bought into. So I think that was probably one of my biggest challenge, was just overcoming that. Uh, the organizational desire to have everything come to the CEO for decision. Second to that was, when you empower people, you can't you can't continue to micromanage them, and two, you can't chop them off at the knees if they do something that you wouldn't have done. I learned a great lesson one time when I was working on the Joint Staff in the Pentagon. I was a major there. Working in an office with a bunch of other service members, so Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps. It was a joint unit, and I was working a position paper for the leadership there on the joint staff, and I needed this Army colonel to take a look at it, and so I walked it over to him, and I was just a major, so two ranks below him, and I have him look at the paper, and he reads through it, and he says to me, "Well," he said, "I could write it different, but I don't know that I could write it any better." So he said, "Let's just go with it." And I thought that was a great lesson. Like, we can all do something different. Like, when somebody comes to me, I'm like, well, I could do that differently, or I could approach that problem different. But at the end of the day, it's going to have the same result that we want. And so let's focus on the results and not on like how we do things. I don't have a lock on all the good ideas. And your team has to know that like there's multiple ways of getting to that, like I say, that end objective. And when you show them that, like, look, that might not have been the way I would do it, but hey, you did it and you got what we needed. So let's just keep doing it, keep encouraging them, empowering them to do that again, and not just force everybody to do things your way.
Awesome. As you think about, and well, let's go there for a minute. A lot has changed in your current organization's performance financially. I know there's been a couple tough years, but you've moved beyond that. Just talk about how that's affected you, the organization, how you've overcome that. This is common for many organizations. Like, hey, our revenue income will fluctuate. We'll have change.
Yes. It started about a year ago, a little over a year ago, and a lot of it had to do with the change in the government business environment. And this is certainly not a political statement or anything like that, but there was a lot of change last year. We had Doge came in that canceled a lot of contracts, and including ones that affected us. Ultimately, resulted in the cancellation of kind of our largest event every year that we relied 70-75% of our revenues on. That's a big hit, and so I found out about this was happening on a Monday morning. I By Wednesday, we had made the decision to cancel the event and start kind of unwinding it from a contract perspective. I mean, you've got 17 hotel contracts, 8 to 10 other contracts, food and beverage, logistics support. With a lot of contract liabilities associated with them, there's a lot of work to unwind that and minimize the damage. But what also impressed upon us was the need to fundamentally change our business model. I mean, if we are relying on 70 to 75% of our revenue from a single event, we've got revenue concentration risk that needs to be distributed to some other events. Probably something we should have done 15 years ago, but we didn't do for whatever reason. Well, now we've got a forcing function. You'd like to make those decisions voluntarily. We were kind of doing it involuntarily. We were forced to it, but nonetheless, we were going to do it. And so we moved swiftly and quickly. We put together within about 30 days kind of a rough outline of a plan of outsourcing staff, cutting costs, selling the building, moving from a single annual event business model to a series of 5 regional events, and had that by May of last year. Kind of initial discussion with our board, and by June, late June, decision via board on all of that, and they were fully supportive of it. So we were executing by the 1st of July this new plan. There was somewhat of a first. I felt there was a first mover advantage, but also I looked at the numbers and it's like, this could be an existential threat if we don't fix this in the next 18 to 24 months. And so time is of the essence here. A lot of people asked me, David, like how I fared during that period, how I was doing. And frankly, I was like, well, I'm not losing any sleep. It's not that I don't care about it or something, but this is business. This is what we do. And I think that the military conditioned me well for that, to make the hard decisions. You got to make those hard decisions. You got to make them fast, and you got to move forward and not second guess yourself. Like, did we make the right decision? I don't know, but we're moving in a new direction. Fortunately for us, starting at the beginning of the year, we're starting to see some leading indicators that are showing us that the
Yeah.
turnaround is happening. It's taking hold, and we are going in the right direction.
Awesome. Uh, let's jump forward. If you think about the next couple years or next stage of growth for SDFM, what will need to change?
There's still a lot of, I think, cultural change in the organization. Some of those legacy thoughts around, how associations operate. Again, people think just because you're a nonprofit that, frankly, you're a charity or something. Your nonprofit status is a tax status. It doesn't really mean anything else. You still have to, again, you have to, operate at a profit every year if you want to remain a going concern. So, inculcating that understanding in the organization is important, and we're not alone in that. I was the chair of the board for the Institute of Management Accountants. They've kind of gone through that transition. I'm currently on the board of the Marine Corps Association, going through that kind of change and understanding of, again, how associations operate. And I think that in our environment, the government business environment, it's still going to remain. There's still a lot of uncertainty out there. And there's a lot of volatility in government. I always like to say the government is a very fickle customer. When they're there, when they're with you, it's great, but they can They can walk away in a heartbeat, just the way government contracts work. They can cancel contracts for convenience of the government and nothing more than that. And so you have to understand that, and you have to price that uncertainty, that risk, into your models again to make sure that uh, you remain operational. I do think also there's going to be a lot more consolidation in the association space, and including maybe with us. And we've had some of those discussions. There probably does need to be some mergers. It's difficult for small to mid-sized associations to operate independently just because of the a lot of the overhead costs, running IT systems and the accounting and audit requirements and the expectations from members from a digital standpoint, being digital first, all of that comes at a cost that frankly associations didn't have 25, 30 years ago, but we have it now.
If you look at your leadership team in that same light and go, what will need to change? Is there something different to that answer?
Yeah, I think that, it's important that associations have a true association professionals running them and not just people who, frankly, like myself, I was in the field of defense financial management and now I'm running an association. I think that from the leadership perspective, it's always going to be important for us to have somebody who was a practitioner in the field. So my position is always going to be held by somebody who worked in defense financial management and has some business acumen. But the people underneath me have to be people that understand how associations work, how businesses work. They can't be people who necessarily worked in defense financial management, and you just expect them. Well, if you knew defense financial management, you'll understand, how to run a business. It's not the same. Again, the revenue cycles are different. The pricing is, you don't do pricing, the understanding benefits, all of that kind of stuff. And so we have made that transition over the last couple of years, put in place what I feel is a strong team of individuals who understand how to run associations. And there's an association of associations, the American Society of Association Executives, who kind of specializes. There's other ones, but that's the one that we work with, and that we're a member of to help again develop our team of association professionals.
Awesome. Um, when you picture the company in 2 years or more, what does success look like?
Yeah, success looks like, well, we're back to where we were revenue wise just 2 years ago, number one, uh, which is between 7.5 to 10 million a year. But two, we're doing it through a series of events and not a single event. So we've distributed that risk, that revenue risk, kind of throughout the fiscal year across, five or six events and not a single annual event. That from a business perspective, to me, would be success. Below that, from a team perspective, again, it would be making sure that we've got the team in place that are again the association professionals that know how to run an association like a business, like a like a for-profit business, but with a nonprofit tax status. Um, and then finally, and probably most important, maybe I should have started here, delivering increasing value to our members because it's all about the value proposition. As a business, for our individual members or our corporate members, they have to see value in what we provide them. Otherwise, they'll go someplace else. They'll vote with their feet.
From a advice to the audience, if you had to summarize your career and go, here's the advice I'd give to young entrepreneurial leaders, someone taking over as first time CEO, any of those. So I'll call it advice to leaders. What would you give them?
I would say, you know, lean in. Let me go back, David, tell you a quick story again. You know, um, when I was a company commander, I was only able to be a company commander for a year. Normally, it's a 2-year assignment. I had, I think, 312 Marines out there at Camp Pendleton. I thought I was going to get 24 months. I only ended up getting 12 or 14 because I got selected to go to school. I went to the Naval Postgraduate School, so they pulled me out to go to school. But when I was in it, I was like, "Okay, I've got 2 years. Let me put together my plan. Let me take kind of my time, to implement these changes and do the training that I wanna do." Before I knew it, I was pulled out, and I remember that night, after the change of command, went out to dinner with my wife, and we're sitting there, and there's just this overwhelming feeling of regret, guilt came over me. I mean, it was pretty tough. It was like, man, I just feel like I missed an opportunity there, and I don't know I'll ever get the opportunity to command again. Who knows? I may never have it again. And so the next time I did have the opportunity as a lieutenant colonel, when I went into battalion command, I just laid it all out there, left it all out there on the playing field every day, and because you never know when you're going to get that opportunity again. And so fortunately I did as a colonel, and so that was one of the things that going back to those four things that I always told the commanders when I was at MEPCOM. Number four, win in command, command, leave it all out there because you never know when it's gonna go, and you may never get that chance again. So that's probably the one piece of advice. If I'm boiling it down to one thing, it's leave it all on the playing field because
That's
you do not wanna have that regret at the end of the day, because it does not feel good.
awesome. Thanks for that,
Live every
Rich.
day to its fullest.
There you go. If listeners want to follow you or SDFM, where should they go?
Go to, www.sdfm.org or connect with me on LinkedIn. Rich Brady, CEO of the Society of Defense Financial Management. Happy to connect with, anybody out there. Strike up a conversation if you're willing and, inclined to.
Rich, really appreciate your time today. If the audience has questions, please reach out to them. What I loved about your candor, vulnerability is you were able to point to here were early mistakes. Here's what I've done. I think that's important for all of us to look and have some self awareness of where we're strong and not, and how we improve. So, thanks for sharing some of that. Thanks for giving us your time. Really appreciate it, Rich.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. I really appreciate it.